If we run out of water, like during the night, you go to the vendor, you find it closed, and they will tell you it's open 24 hours. And it's hard because sometimes even if you go during the day, you find that the computers are down, and you have to walk long distance, like to Jabulani, to find a vendor so that you can get water units because there's no like extra or emergency.
But the greater problem is that, in fact, many households in Peru just simply don't have the money.
With the prepaid water meters, it's like you run out of the 6,000 liters that's free on the 14th day of the month.
The reality in the households, as on the papers, is that Lindiwe Mazibuko, our lead applicant, explains how on the 15th or 16th day of every month, despite their attempts to conserve water, despite them flushing the toilet, 20 people in one household flushing the toilet only every 2 days, despite them not bathing their children before they go to school, despite them making unacceptable compromises, the water runs out halfway in the month and they have no more water for days at a time until somebody can get 10 rand here or 10 rand there to buy some more water credit. It's a highly populated, high-density area. There are not rivers. People can't bathe or wash in rivers. And for health and public decency reasons, people can't relieve themselves in the public. So they don't have other options. And flushing toilet takes about 13 liters per toilet flush. Bathing takes, we're not talking about people showering or bathing. There, on the whole, are not baths. People take a bucket outside and they bathe, but you need water for that. The resistance itself in the beginning, and I'd like to stress that, really occurred naturally from people who realized these hardships that prepayment meters would impose. And part of that is understanding that the national free basic water policy of 6,000 liters per household per month is a policy of an allocation to one household. But what it really means is per property. And in Peru it's problematic because there are multi-dwelling properties. So you have one main house and you have several backyard shacks. And all of those families have to share the same free basic water allocation. So whereas the national policy is premised on a calculation of 25 liters of water per person per day in a household of 8, in Peru, there are typically 16 people per property that have to share that water, and there can be more. For example, our lead applicant, Lindiwe Mazibuko, had 20 people on her property. So they were getting less than 8 liters per day each.
According to the constitution of the country, it says everyone has the right to sufficient, clean and safe water. So when Joburg Water came with this policy of free basic water on 6,000 liters per household per month on 8 family members, it was like they were killing us because we live in big families.
This is a 25-liter container. This is what the city believes each person should get per day. One person, one day. This. We don't believe that's enough water for a human being to survive on. Even if you just flush the toilets, you've already used about half of this. There's nothing left for drinking, there's nothing left for preparing food, there's nothing left for bathing, for washing. Forget about it if you have a garden, you're trying to grow vegetables, there'll be nothing left. So we're saying we need at least double this for free per person per day.
I think it's a question of the adequacy. It's always difficult to set that, but I think what we're trying to do is to make it progressive. In other words, more than it has been. And in that context, what the Constitution says is progressive realization of those rights. So we're taking a step. So my understanding of that constitutional provision is that it must be equal, that that everybody must have the same rights, not they mustn't be employed just because you're poor or rich.
And the international expert on water sufficiency, Dr. Peter Gleich, who's been part of our case, has made it clear internationally that the minimum per day that a person needs to lead a dignified and healthy life is 50 liters. This is not an issue, a water conservation issue primarily, because in South Africa 70% of water is consumed by agriculture. It's only 10% that's consumed by domestic consumption, and of that, only a very small percentage is consumed by the poor.
The biggest users and the biggest people, the ones who get subsidized and pay the least, are the mining companies and the agro conglomerates, in other words, agribusiness. In other words, those that have the most pay the least. And those that have the least pay the most.
And if it's about revenue, we've been at pains in this case to show that the city has enough revenue and that the city can price the water to rich people and high luxury end consumers much higher. They will still be able to afford it, and the city can then cross-subsidize more free basic water. They were very much helped in this resistance by a social movement called the Anti-Privatization Forum, the APF, which had been formed in 2000.
Through the Anti-Privatization Forum, which is a social movement, we began to organize in Piri.
And the reason why we, as the Anti-Privatization Forum, we initiated the coalition outside the APF was the fact that we wanted everyone who see water as a human right, without any ideology, to be part of the coalition. We wanted every structure, every organization to come together and say we were claiming water for people, especially those who cannot pay.
The first phase of that resistance was physical resistance. There was literally a war in Piri for several weeks. We were not able to sustain that because hundreds of people arrested, jailed, massive bail, so we turned to a legal solution, or at least a potential solution.
The resistance, the direct resistance, had in fact floundered somewhat because the city of Johannesburg had acted in a draconian way against the protesters and taken out an interdict with wide-ranging terms. And the terms of the interdict was that nobody could come within 50 meters of Johannesburg Water's work. And the interdict also authorized Johannesburg Water to employ private security to effect those arrests. And indeed, many comrades were arrested. And it was precisely at that point that the Center for Applied Legal Studies and the Freedom of Expression Institute became aware of the situation in Piri. And in discussions with the social movements, with the APF, we decided to go and talk to the people of Piri about the opportunity of a case. And throughout, we were always extremely careful to ensure that we offered one tactic, one idea. We didn't want to take over the struggle. We were very aware that the people of Piri should choose for themselves how they went forward, and if they wanted to continue direct resistance and if they wanted to continue mobilizing, that was absolutely their decision. But we offered one opportunity, and it was accepted by consensus in a very big meeting, and then within the social movements as well. I believe that there was a mutual reinforcement between these organizations, these legal NGOs that were involved, and the social movements and the people of Piri. It's a model which around the world is increasingly being shown to be very useful, and in South Africa it was very usefully used in the TAC case, where there was a social movement for antiretrovirals and there was litigation. After the discussions with social movements and the people of Piri, we also went to a very well-known advocate, one of the top advocates in South Africa, Wim Trengove, and we talked to him about the case. He was very keen, and he committed to us up front to do it for free. So at that point, we realized we were able to build a really strong case. And first of all, we used the Freedom of Expression Institute and their attorneys as the legal team representing the applicants, and we decided to take 5 applicants. We did that because in the beginning we'd documented extensively 95 household circumstances, but we realized that this was going to be a long drawn-out case because socioeconomic rights cases often are, and we knew it would be impossible to keep up with all of the details across 95 people's stories over the years. So in essence, we decided in the end to go for 5 people who each represented some of the particular problems of the city's actions in Piri. And so we went with Lindiwe Mazibuko as our lead applicant because she is a very poor, I say she is, but in fact Lindiwe Mazibuko very tragically died last year after a very long illness. She died just after the High Court case decision came down.